All right, good afternoon. I'm Amy Snyder from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us for the I Want It That Way, Student and Faculty Attitudes Toward Ebook Piracy session. This discussion will be recorded and it will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA CRD YouTube channel, as well as sent out to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset or speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right throughout the discussion, and we'll attempt to include your questions as appropriate during the discussion or at the end. We'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues. Please post those issues in the chat box as well. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate Planning Committee members, including Andrea Pritt, Adam Balchunas, Christy Alderman-Ritter, and Rana Lee Choco. Please contact any one of the team for information about becoming a PALA member. This project is made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Josh Shapiro Governor. And finally, I'd like to thank and introduce our presenters for today's event. Haley Dittbrenner is a junior student at Susquehanna University who studies creative and professional writing as well as publishing and editing. She currently works as a student manager at the Blau-Weiss Library. She wants to make a career out of open access and publishing librarianship. Rob Siskevich is Associate Professor and Director of Blau-Weiss Library at Susquehanna University. Previously, he was a digital scholarship and instruction librarian, and before that, a university archivist. His research interests include digital humanities, information literacy, and open access. So welcome, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to our presenters.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. As mentioned, my name is Haley Dittbrenner, and this is my co-host and research partner, Rob Siskevich. We've been working on this research since the fall of last year, so we really appreciate being here. With introductions out of the way, I'm just going to head straight to our first activity, which is going to be a quick poll. So now that you know who we are, let's learn a little bit about each other. So why did you give up some of your afternoon to attend this session? Maybe you have some interest in piracy. Let's do a quick poll. So what word or words do you think of when you hear the word piracy? Please go to pollev.com/quietsilence652 to participate. The link should be in the chat, and if you'd rather participate on a phone, please text Quiet Silence 652 to 37607. Yep, that should be in the chat. I can also turn things over to Rob because he is the one who's manning the poll, so he might have more insight.
All right, I've entered the link in the chat, and it looks like our folks, to me, it looks like the word cloud is showing up. Can everybody see that?
I don't see that yet.
You don't see it yet? Oh. How about now? Are folks able to see the word cloud live?
It still looks blank.
Oh no. Stop the I'll stop sharing it and try one more time. Oh dear. Thanks everyone for your patience. You know, this stuff always works in practice, and then you try to go live and
no shame in trying again.
Are folks able to see a word cloud now?
I'm afraid not.
Oh no.
Not yet. It says at the bottom to start the presentation to see live content. I don't know if that could be something you have to click on, maybe.
Maybe.
There we go.
Great. All right, thanks for your patience again. So wow, it looks like the biggest words for me, the biggest word is theft, and then illegal is also quite large. Free and digital are also responses that people have. Oh, dishonesty is growing. Okay, so let's see. I see some positive attributes as well. Bravery is on there, sharing, access. So we do see some words that represent to some library values, but overall, it seems like folks' impressions are negative. Haley, any thoughts on anything you see on the word cloud?
I think the only thing that I could point out that maybe you didn't is like, I guess the use of digital, really emphasizing that piracy is something of a new age. It didn't really exist before computers. It's different than just taking a used book and bringing it back into circulation through used copies and sharing copies of books. So this is kind of a uniquely modern issue in the book world.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to our slides. When we were doing research on the topic, one thing I observed was that internationally, a lot of piracy really is still in print, as not everybody has the same access to digital texts, although it seems like it's certainly moving in that direction. All right, so let's go back to our slides. Oh man, it's always a challenge. Haley, while I get the slides up, would you like to tell people about our research project?
Yes, I would. Alrighty. So our research project really began before either of us knew it in November of 2022, when Z Library was shut down by the United States government on the grounds of copyright. We'll go more in depth with Z Library and what happened with them in a moment. But the effects of this decision were instantly felt on college campuses throughout the country, including Susquehanna University's campus. I know my peers who struggle with accessing textbooks had to find other ways of getting their materials. I'm lucky in that I don't struggle with textbook inaccessibility, but I know people who, once Z Library was gone, they didn't have, it was a resource for them to get textbooks that they no longer had. Rob told me once a story where a student came up to him at the library and they asked for a book. And while Rob was looking for it, the student said that normally they would pirate this book, but because with Z Library gone, they had no other ways of getting this resource. Not too long after, Susquehanna University sent out applications for the March Fellowship in Ethical Leadership. The March Fellowship is a Susquehanna University fellowship given out to 2 faculty-student pairs every academic year. The fellowship was made so that Susquehanna students can explore an ethical topic in depth for around 1 semester. The research culminates in a presentation of the research and a final paper. The chosen students are often seniors, but I was very lucky to be given this fellowship as a sophomore. Rob and I used our fellowship to explore the ethics of piracy while proposing useful and realistic ways to decrease piracy on Susquehanna's campus. Then that calls into question, what sites are students using? Why are they using it? At what rates? One of the more popular websites, as we talked about a little earlier, is Z Library. So Z Library, also known as zlib, is a very, very popular shadow library. Shadow libraries are a formal term for a book pirating website, but they are ultimately the same thing. The 2 terms can be used interchangeably. So Z Library is a book pirating site or shadow library that allows people to download a limited number of books per day, around 5 to 10. Z Library was originally a regular website under a single domain that people could access worldwide using the regular web. The website was seized by the United States Department of Justice in November of 2022 on the grounds of copyright infringement. One thing that contributed to this was the social media site TikTok, They popularized Z Library and made it known to a wider number of people. And with a greater audience came more people who were talking about it, and this caught the attention of authorities, of publishers, and other people who might oppose. After Z Library was shut down, it was only available through the dark web until it resurfaced on the regular web again in February of this year, 2023. The site now issues users their own personal domain to avoid being taken down by the government, a move ultimately done in vain because in May of 2023, just a few months ago, the United States government conducted another round of domain seizures. The website is used to download trade books. Trade books is a publishing term used to describe fiction and nonfiction books that you'd find in a library, as well as textbooks and articles. This means that the website is used by an audience of students and non-students alike. As of May 2023, it's written that 600,000 users worldwide are estimated to have their own personal domains with Z Library. So that is a lot of users. Today, the legality of Z Library is a point of debate among academics, authors, and publishers throughout the world. Obviously, legality is a common point of debate in the United States, but it's also challenged in Great Britain, France, and India, with bans and legal challenges being imposed across all 4 nations. Bans at worst and legal challenges at best, depending on who your sympathies lie with, whether you're pro or anti-piracy. Another website that you may have heard of is the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive is a digital library that provides free access to ebooks, websites, software, music. If you've used the Wayback Machine, you've used something that's run by the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive operates in a similar manner to a traditional brick and mortar library where ebooks are checked out for a limited time before being returned and then made unavailable to the user. It's also similar to ebook lending programs that other local public libraries may offer. Trouble for the Internet Archive arose during the COVID-19 crisis. The Internet Archive created they called it the Emergency COVID Library, and that all digital materials were available in unlimited amounts for an unlimited amount of time. If we're going to go back to the comparison of brick and mortar traditional libraries, it's the equivalent of a library just giving out their books for free. This decision was done to incentivize people to stay home and reduce the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And it's also worth noting that authors did have the choice to opt into having their books featured in this library. This ultimately, the decision to host the Emergency COVID Library led to Hachette Book Group, a major publisher, filing a lawsuit against Internet Archive. Hachette argued that the Internet Archive was committing copyright infringement, while the archives argued that the Emergency COVID Library was legal under terms of fair use and controlled digital lending. In March of 2023, the courts ruled in favor of Hachette, and the Internet Archive currently plans to appeal that decision and continue to fight legal battles. All right, so the last shadow library that we'll be talking about is Sci-Hub. Sci-Hub is a shadow library that specifically caters to scientific and academic audiences, so a lot of students. Sci-Hub, unlike Z Library, allows its users to download an unlimited amount of articles per day. The site was first conceived when its creator, who is pictured here, Alexandria Elbakian, at the time a very, very poor graduate student, struggled to find resources that weren't behind paywalls. Sci-Hub was eventually sued by the United States government for copyright infringement twice in 2015 and 2017, respectively. Since then, the site has managed to remain online through the recycling of domain names. Today, the site is still very, very well used, and the site has over 95% of scientific articles with a registered DOI number. As I mentioned, Sci-Hub is extremely popular among academic scientific audiences, and a 2023 study conducted by Francisco Segato Baj, Juan Martin Quevedo, and Juan Jose Prieto Gutierrez suggests that 50% of academics have used Sci-Hub at least once in their careers to access articles without paywalls. Now, we're going to get into this a little later in the presentation, about the idea of open access and open education for all. Alexandria Elbakian is a huge proprietor of that and is one of her main tenets. On her website, she writes, the current system of producing knowledge in science is a classical example of a failed capitalist system. Researchers are being exploited and do not receive money for their work. The knowledge they produce in the form of research papers does not belong to them, and it does not belong to the people either. Instead, the knowledge and science today is a private property of a few mighty businesses who make huge amounts of money from it. Not only that system is an obstacle to the progress, but it also creates huge distances between rich and poor, where poor people are blocked from access to knowledge, and that includes such important areas as medicine and healthcare. The central idea of Sci-Hub is that knowledge belongs to all people. All right, so if these websites are questionable at best and downright illegal at worst, why do students want it that way and continue to pirate books? Especially because pirate sites are often very unreliable because they can be shut down by the government without a second thought. Our research, albeit of a very small sample size, helps shine the light on why students choose to pirate books. I'm going to hand things over to Rob now as he helps analyze some of our research.
Actually, we want to do another activity. And now that we've discussed some of those shadow libraries, we want to hear from you. So have you ever used a shadow library? Please go to polev.com/quietsilence652 or text quietsilence652 to the number 37607 on your mobile device. So I'm seeing some responses come in, but I don't know if folks can see this or not. Not able to. Okay, sounds good. Then I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and just present the poll everywhere. All right, are folks able to see it now? Super, okay. So even though it seemed like based on the mood of as your mood is expressed in the word cloud, that a lot of folks who are joining today have negative attitudes or primarily associate piracy with illegal behavior, it looks like we have the majority of participants have used a shadow library. 2/3 of people on this call, at least 2/3 of people who are participating, have used a shadow library. Feel free to share your experience using shadow libraries in the chat if you wish, if you have any stories or a shadow library that that you want to talk about. We're not going to talk too much about this in our breakout groups. Haley and I just wanted to have a sense of your familiarity with shadow libraries. So we're up to more than 2/3 of participants have used a shadow library. Very cool. All right, we're going to stop sharing at this point because it seems like, oh, we're up to 3/4. All right. Cool. Thanks everyone for participating in that activity with us. We appreciate learning about your experiences with shadow libraries. So I'm going to go back to our presentation. And I want to, Haley has given you the context, and now I'd like to share with you some of the specific findings. So before I begin, let me note that neither Haley or I is an attorney, and nothing in our presentation should be considered legal advice. Well, with that caveat out of the way, I'll give you one more caveat. This is not a statistically significant sample size. We polled the Susquehanna student body, which is about 2,200 FTE, and we received 36 responses. So that's less than 2% of the student body. Not statistically significant from a quantitative point of view, but we thought as a qualitative research, we received some interesting responses. So before we get to the student free text responses, I just want to give you some highlights of the survey. You'll see we asked students questions. You'll see on the slide that we asked students questions in 4 main groups. We wanted to know where they get their books, how familiar they were with shadow libraries, whether or not they pirated books, and what their thoughts on the ethics of ebook piracy were. So I'll read to you some of the highlights. Responses to where students get their print books range from the campus bookstore to online sources such as Amazon, Chegg, and Thrift Books. We also asked students where they legally obtained online texts or digital texts, and responses included Amazon, the Blau-Weiss Library of Course Reserves, yay. Other students, and then the largest number of respondents said that they get online books or digital texts from their professors through sites such as Canvas, which is our learning management system. In terms of familiarity with shadow libraries, the majority of students had heard of one or more shadow libraries. As Haley suggested earlier, Z Library or ZLib was the most popular, with almost half of respondents saying they were familiar with it. Fewer people had heard about social media such as Reddit, social media sites such as Reddit as a tool for piracy. And only one student reported having used Sci-Hub. So then we asked students why they pirate books if they do. 17 respondents said that they had pirated books, and about half said that they do so because a book wasn't available to them anywhere else. 41% said they pirate books because of cost. Just under a third of students said they pirate books because they weren't sure if the book would actually be used in a class. They didn't want to commit limited resources to a book that may not be actually required to pass the class. But the largest number, over half, said that they pirate books because of convenience and the preferred user interface. This is where we get our title from, the discovery that while piracy is, of course, driven by the cost of resources, it is also driven by users wanting it their way. So we also asked students why they didn't pirate, for those who chose not to, and about half of them said they didn't have a need to pirate books, and a quarter said they didn't want to pirate because of the risks, such as viruses and the chance of their personal information being compromised. A small fraction said that it was too confusing, and then only one student of the 36 who began the survey said that they did not pirate for ethical reasons. Again, not statistically significant enough to generalize for our entire student population, but we did find it interesting that only one of our respondents cited ethical reasons for not pirating books. Okay, so we want to share some of the student voices with you. These are responses to the survey. One student said, "I've only done it once or twice, and though I know it's illegal, I did it because I was already over my allotted budget for textbooks and it was free. So I mainly did it for necessity. Also, textbooks are hella overpriced for information I can just find in online articles for free." So we highlighted this one because for this student, it is all about the money. This isn't surprising, right? As mentioned, cost of resources is acknowledged to be a key driver of piracy. Even students who thought piracy was unethical also framed their opposition in terms of money. So one student said, "Piracy is stealing because you are stealing money from the creator. The creator has a right to demand to be paid. To disrespect that right is essentially taking money from them." However, as we suggest in our title, cost is not the only factor. Let's look at another example. Some students are thinking about their impact of their behavior on others. And this student said that, "I find it ethical because I'm not going after a small author. Also, if I am doing it for education, I think it should be fair. It's not like I don't buy books. I mean, what about used books then? What makes that ethical if it means the author is still not getting any money from a used book being put back into circulation?" So because the March Fellowship is about ethical living, part of Haley and my project was to try to examine ethical perspectives. We won't get into that too much in this presentation, but we're happy to get into that in the Q&A at the end if folks are interested in different ethical perspectives that we use to frame some of these responses. So I would like to read one more student response. "Ethics is a fascinating topic and pertinent to large companies of any kind, but it sure is a hell of a lot more convenient than any other option, and honestly safer as long as you have a competent ad block." And I believe that is the cool dude in shades emoticon at the end. So this response illustrates an attitude that surprised me at first, how important convenience is to many students. And this attitude presents us as librarians and library workers with an opportunity. We don't have a lot of impact on the prices of textbooks, although we will be talking about OER later in the presentation. However, library workers do have control over our platforms. And when Haley and I were looking at these responses and talking about it, it reminded me of Jacob Nielsen's law of internet user experience, commonly known as Jacob's law. Are folks familiar with this? Feel free to say yes or no in the chat if you're familiar with Jacob Nielsen. So Nielsen says that users spend most of their time on other sites. This means that other users prefer your site to work the same way as all the other sites they already know. You should design for patterns for which users are accustomed. And Nielsen says, if your site doesn't operate in the way people expect, they're going to leave and use other sites. So this made me wonder, do we make it easier for students to get their textbook from a shadow library, aka a pirate site, than from the campus library? And I find this a rather humbling thought. We're going to move now to our faculty survey results. In sharp contrast to our attempt to survey students, where we received an underwhelming response rate, we were very pleased that we received a high response rate from faculty. We randomly selected 25% of the faculty by randomly picking names from a faculty directory and sent out approximately 40 invitations to faculty to participate in the survey. We received 32 faculty members at least began the survey. So it's possible that some folks heard about it or got the links from one of us who weren't in that original 40 group. So we can't say that truly 32 out of 40 who were invited participated, but faculty were eager to participate in the survey, I think we can say. Whereas we heard from some students that they were a little afraid to take an anonymous survey on illegal behavior. All right, so you can see here the four groups of questions that we asked faculty are whether or not they require students to purchase books and whether they think students do. And rather than read this list, I'll just jump into the results. 70% of the faculty members who responded to the question said that yes, they require students to purchase books. We asked if they believe that students do buy those books, and about 2/3 of the respondents say they believe students buy books for their classes most of the time. Only 10% of faculty believe that students rarely buy books for their classes. So from this, we can observe that faculty members believe that students are generally acquiring the resources for their classes. We also asked faculty how they select textbooks, and the largest number of faculty, almost 1/3, said that they select their textbooks based on how well books fit in with the course material. This is not surprising, I expect. About 1/4 of the responses, however, said that they consider cost as a factor when selecting textbooks. So we observed that some students choose to pirate books based on relevance and course concerns, and it seems that professors are aware of this, and they try to address these student concerns in their textbook selections. We also asked faculty about their familiarity with pirate sites, and there are some parallels with the shadow libraries that students are aware of. Faculty were most familiar with the use of social media sites such as Reddit for pirating books, with about 1/3 of faculty reporting that they knew that that was a realm for piracy. Fewer than 1/4 had heard of ZLibrary or LibGen, and only about 1 in 10 was familiar with Sci-Hub, which was somewhat surprising, particularly given the study that Haley cited earlier, that up to half of faculty of researchers may have used Sci-Hub. So we asked faculty what percentage of students they think pirate books, and the respondents estimated on average, this is the mean response, the median response, not the mean, about 1/3 of Susquehanna University students pirate books. So there was a range of faculty responses. The highest answer we received was one faculty member thought that 70% of students pirated books, and the lowest estimate was that only 10%. But the bulk of faculty responses figured about 1/3 of students were pirating books. And then finally, we asked faculty whether or not they thought it was ethical. We received 27 responses to that question, and just under half, 44%, stated that piracy is unethical. Only 15% said they believe that piracy is ethical, and 40% responded other. Despite the widespread sentiment that piracy is unethical, however, 70% of faculty neither encourage nor discourage students from using pirate sites. Only 11% of faculty responding to this question said that they actively discourage students from committing piracy. All right, we'll close out this section by sharing some of the free text responses that faculty shared. Several faculty expressed a clear opposition to piracy, noting that they oppose piracy because the authors of the textbook are not getting payment for their work, or because pirate sites are stealing intellectual property from authors, or because it's the intellectual property of the author and should be protected or paid for. So those are just a handful of the responses from the faculty who found piracy flat out unethical. But not all faculty condemned students' behavior. For example, one faculty member said, "I don't consider it ethical, but I understand why it's done. The price of textbooks is generally outrageous and not because of the content. At least in my field, there's all kinds of wasted space on the page, digest type information or goofy stuff to make it more user-friendly or less intimidating," or I'm not sure what this faculty member wrote. So this suggests that some of the faculty are sympathetic to students, and also that they themselves have concerns about the quality of the textbooks that they're assigned. So as you would imagine, many of the responses expressed ambivalence, where the faculty opposed theft but registered concerns with the current capitalist model of textbook sales. For example, one person wrote, "Abstractly, I consider book piracy to be unethical, as the author or artist goes uncompensated for their effort. However, book publication is often unethical, such as textbooks that put out a new edition nearly every year with few changes so that the professors who get a free desk copy require the latest version of the book, cutting out the used book market and so maximizing profits." Haley and I also conducted a focus group with faculty and students. We're not going to get into that here for interest of time, but I think one theme that ran through that, as well as through some of the free text responses, is the frustration that faculty and students alike feel with the current sales and distribution model that's available to them. So now that we've presented our findings, we want to start to talk with you about solutions. We're at about the halfway point of our presentation, so we think this is a good time to pause our presentation and move into breakout groups. We'd like to split up into some small groups, and we have 2 questions that we would like you to discuss in your small groups. Those are, what do you think are some of the best practices for reducing ebook piracy? And does your library have an OER program? If so, does it address piracy? So we are going to open it up into breakout rooms. And we're going to randomly assign people to one of 4 breakout rooms. So, oh yeah, sorry. I will put those questions in the chat.
And then I can start creating some breakout rooms.
Oh, I've got it ready to go.
Oh, never mind then. Thank you.
If you've done a breakout room before, you probably know what we're going to ask. Please do pick someone from your group as a note taker to report back. Okay, so questions are in the chat. Please do pick a reporter from your group. We're going to take 10 minutes for this conversation, then we're going to come back and we'd ask that everybody share, that the reporter for each group share some of the highlights of your conversation. Does anybody have any questions before we move to breakout rooms?
I am going to go ahead and pause the recording for now. So just make sure that I start it back up again when we come back to the main room.
Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody. May I ask a representative or the spokesperson from group 1 to share what are the highlights of your conversation?
All right, so I think, let me pull up my notes. So I think one of the main things that we talked about was the different ways to combat piracy on different campuses. Because I know some of the folks in my group talked about like their OER programs and they didn't deliberately combat piracy, so they had to look towards other ways of combating it. So I think definitely fighting the convenience aspect of it. When you go to pirate something, you know it's going to be on XYZ site. Whereas if you go to a regular library or the bookstore, it's a question of whether or not that resource is going to be available. Also, some methods that were suggested were promoting interlibrary loans, having databases that are easy to use and make it very clear which resources are available or not. Making sure that people have clear access to resources that may be permanent or impermanent ownership. So those are some of the things that we talked about.
Great, thank you, Haley. How about group 2? Did you pick a spokesperson and could you share some highlights?
I was from group 2 and we did not nominate a spokesperson, but I can kind of share what we were talking about, which was that when we do use OER, there's like a lack of consistency across platforms and differing rules and interfaces for like all of these different open access resources. And so a way of promoting it would be like if you could make that simply easier and more accessible to the user. And then we were just kind of talking about publishing companies. So that's about it.
Well, I think that is a great suggestion if the issue with piracy is convenience, and then OER can be a challenge. And Haley's going to talk a little bit about that after. How about group 3? What were some of the highlights of your conversation?
I think our group was group 3. So we talked about how helpful it can be simply to teach students how to find ebooks in the library catalog. Simple thing, but often students don't know. So we also said that the library should have a policy of getting multi-user ebook licenses whenever possible. One school has an OER session for first-year students specifically, although it's open to anyone, but really promoted to first-year students. My institution made a flow chart about how to find textbooks, and I'll drop that link in the chat. And we also, not to everyone, this year we're going to try taking that a step further and having, we haven't really decided what to call it yet. Right now we're just saying office hours, but we're going to have open times when students can drop in and we'll basically do the flow chart. Like, you know, what books do you need? Okay, we'll pull out all the stops and see, are they in the library catalog? Could they be in the library catalog? We'll check Gobi. Are they here? Are they here? If nothing else, we can reach out to the professor and say, we've been working with students from your class. Can you put a copy on reserve? Here's the form. So we're going to try to help negotiate that very complicated landscape for them. So that's what we talked about for number 1. We sort of ran out of time and didn't talk much about number 2. People seem to have OER programs, but we're not really addressing piracy in a very overt way. That's my report from group 3.
Great, thank you, Janelle, for sharing your group's findings, and thanks for sharing that link with us. I'm sure people will be excited to check that out. And then group 4, do we have a volunteer or a designated spokesperson from group 4?
Hi, group 4 rep here. We our reps, or our group members rather, we have fairly basic OER programs at our institutions, mostly focusing on direct faculty outreach, things like that. One of our group members has some experience with the equal access programs, these new textbook access programs that are being pushed by some of the bookstores on campuses. And, you know, there's varying opinions on whether they're worth it or not. But that is something that has come up and is probably going to be in conversations around OER in general over the next few years, and textbook accessibility. In terms of reducing piracy, we did touch on a lot of the things that have been mentioned already. Those equal access programs is one that I would add to that list as a possibility if it's something your institution is interested in. And that's mostly it.
Great, thank you for sharing your group's thoughts. We're going to close out our presentation by with Haley is sharing some thoughts on OER and piracy. And I'm going to share our last slide.
Great, thank you. So like Rob said, briefly, we're just going to touch a little bit on open access and book piracy. So as our conversations have helped shed light on, open access content is often suggested as a solution to book piracy. As you guys know, open access, also shortened to OA or OER, is a term that describes research, articles, textbooks, and trade books that are distributed online freely without paywalls or other barriers to prevent people from accessing them. OA content, often relies on author fees, public donations, or sponsorship, whereas paywalled content covers the cost of publishing through subscriptions or the use of other fees. So that's one thing to consider when an institution decides to start up an OER program. How is it going to be funded? In terms of piracy, the results of our survey suggest that open access content may help with issues of cost or availability, but may not be as effective for convenience issues convenience issues. My apologies. I think with the convenience, it's the idea of the one-stop shop. You know it's going to be there, whereas if with an open access program, similar to a traditional library or other legal means of accessing textbooks and articles, you're not sure if it's going to be there. You might have to bounce around between different shops, different bookstores, different libraries. Whereas with a pirate site, it's just going to be there. Like we mentioned with Sci-Hub, they have over 95% of articles with a registered DOI number. It's in a way almost harder to find the resource that isn't there. The same idea could be said of open access. Similar to a physical library, you're not sure if it's going to be there. So I think if you wanted to use OER to combat book piracy, it's a matter of making as many materials available to students as possible to make it so that open access is more convenient than pirating. And with that note, we are at the end of our presentation. Thank you guys for being such a wonderful audience. We really, really appreciate it. We'll now open the floor for questions and further conversation.
At this point, feel free to put questions in the chat box, or if you want to come off mic, feel free to raise your hand. I know some people might need to head out shortly, so you have another meeting coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the evaluation form in the chat box. It's important that you please take the time to submit your responses, as we are required to submit evaluation data as part of our LSTA grant application. So if you need to head off, feel free to click that link so you can respond to our survey. We did look at the questions that came in before that people submitted with the registration form. So I'm going to kind of summarize the one here. But you surveyed faculty and staff on their views on these things. But I'm wondering, what are you doing? Is there anything you're doing to address piracy or any of these things on your campus going forward?
I think it's a very good question. I think the one thing that we're trying to do is restart our OER program. That was one of our main things that we were trying to do, trying to make as many resources available to students to disincentivize them from pirating. So I believe in this upcoming semester, I know for one, I'll be working as an intern with the library, trying to work on the OER program and get try to jumpstart that on our campus again. Do you have anything to add, Rob?
No, I think Haley's really captured it, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to make this so interactive, is we were hoping to get ideas from folks who are already working in this space. And we welcome any thoughts that people have after the presentation is over.
We also had another question come in beforehand about knowing where people are downloading textbooks and other resources. How do you find the sites that people are using? Do you have any insights into that?
I would say as a student, a lot of it just stems from social media. I think that's one of the reasons why Z Library got so big, because people were talking about it on TikTok and bring it to a wider audience. I know, to use a personal example, after Z Library was shut down, another pirating site, Anna's Archive was created almost as a replacement for Z Library. I found out about that through social media sites and people who are talking about pirating. So that's what I found. That's what I found mostly. It's just through social media, people online who are talking about this. Not so much, at least in my opinion, people who are talking about it in person. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, at least in the United States, it's tends to be a very uniquely online issue. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Rob?
I would say until Z Library was shut down, I had no idea of how big a role pirate sites played or shadow libraries played for students at Susquehanna. So I think it can be a real obstacle. We found that asking students to complete a survey is really difficult. A lot of students don't want to share that in a survey. So I think it's a great question, whomever asked it, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
I have a question come in through the chat. Have you ever been providing library instruction in a class and have the professor mention Sci-Hub or ResearchGate? If so, did you address that at all?
I have not had that happen. I can certainly envision having that happen, and I think it would be instruction librarians would be wise to be prepared to discuss both the appeal of Sci-Hub, but also its limitation. I know one of the reasons a lot of people in our field oppose Sci-Hub is because it has relied on harvesting user credentials. It isn't just articles that people have voluntarily uploaded. People have given their credentials to Sci-Hub, and some people have alleged that Sci-Hub has used phishing methods to get credentials to log into sites to build their library of articles. So it is certainly not without its ethical downside. I'm less familiar with the argument or cautions about ResearchGate. I imagine some faculty or some researchers do upload content to ResearchGate without, looking at permissions and whether they're allowed to do so. And I'd certainly welcome anyone else on who's on the call today who has who can articulate that argument either for or against Sci-Hub and ResearchGate.
Any other questions from folks? Okay, so just to make sure I wrap up things in our recording, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I'd like to thank Haley and Rob for presenting for us. I put another link to the evaluation form in the chat, so I hope everyone will take a few moments to complete the survey and let us know your thoughts about the presentation today and about our programming in general. If you are not a PALA member and you're interested in becoming a member, please feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat box, and I'll have the appropriate person contact you. You're also welcome to contact me for your suggestions for future discussions and presentations, and you're most definitely invited to contact me if you would like to present. Looking at the chat to see if anything else has come through. I think we can stop the recording and then